The farmhouse sat quiet under a fading orange sky. Dust floated through the air as he pushed the heavy wooden door open. He stepped inside and froze. On the living room wall, behind a layer of old wallpaper peeling away, he saw a carving. "For my son, I'm sorry." Underneath it, a hand-drawn map pointing toward a hidden door in the basement. His heart stopped. Whatever his father hid down there had been waiting for him and only him. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. The gravel sounded the same as it always did. Even after all these years, that crunch under the tires was exactly how he remembered it. Sharp, slow, like the driveway itself was judging whoever dared to come back. Ethan Cole shut off the engine and just sat there for a second, hands still on the steering wheel, staring at the old farmhouse like it was an ex he swore he'd never see again. The house hadn't changed much. Same sagging porch, same crooked shutters, same chipped white paint, now more gray than anything else. The only thing that was different was the silence. When he was a kid, there'd always been some kind of noise, a radio playing low in the kitchen, the TV humming in the living room, his father stomping through the hallways, boots heavy with dirt and thick with unspoken words. Now, nothing. Just wind, just stillness, just the sound of a man who didn't want to be here, trying to convince himself to get out of the car. He sighed, rubbed a hand over his face, and finally shoved the door open. Cold air hit him first, that mix of countryside chill and faint smoke from someone's fireplace miles away. He closed the car door gently. Like too loud a sound might wake something up he wasn't ready to deal with. He took in the porch as he walked toward it. Same loose step on the right side. Same rusted chair his father used to sit in after long days, cigarette dangling, eyes somewhere Ethan never figured out. Same screen door that always squeaked but never got fixed. He stepped onto the porch and paused, hand hovering near the doorknob. It felt wrong, walking into the house without knocking. Then again, there was nobody left to answer. His father was gone. Heart attack. Sudden. One phone call from a tight-voiced lawyer. "I'm sorry for your loss. There's some property business we'll need to discuss." No warm condolences. No "how are you holding up?" Just paperwork and a funeral he barely stayed through. Ethan swallowed, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The smell hit him like a memory. Old wood, dust, coffee, and faint tobacco baked into the walls from decades of his father's bad habit. The place looked frozen in time. Boots still by the door, jackets still hanging on the hook, a hat tossed on the small entry table like its owner might come back any minute and grab it again. But he wouldn't. "Hey, old man," Ethan muttered under his breath, stepping inside. "I'm here. Don't get too excited." He shut the door behind him. The latch clicked with a hollow finality. The living room was exactly how he remembered it. Same ugly brown couch, same faded blue recliner, same TV that probably still only got 3 channels without a fight. He stood in the doorway, letting his eyes move slowly across it all. And just like that, the memories started pressing in. Quiet dinners, where the only sound was a fork scraping a plate. Arguments that started with nothing and ended with slammed doors, and his father saying, "You think you know everything, boy? You don't know a damn thing." Nights when Ethan would sit on that old couch while his father sat in that recliner, baseball game on, neither of them saying what they really wanted to say. "I'm trying. So am I." Neither phrase ever left their mouths. He dragged a hand through his hair and blew out a breath. He wasn't here to dig through the past. He was here to clean the place out, meet with the lawyer, sign whatever needed signing, and go back to the life he'd built far away from this house, this town, this man. That was the plan. In, out, done. He walked through the living room toward the kitchen, footsteps echoing a little too loud in the empty house. The kitchen looked like it always had, like time just forgot about it. Old wooden cabinets, the small table in the corner. 2 chairs, just 2. The third one, the one that used to sit on the other side, where his mother used to be, had been gone since Ethan was 12. He didn't think about that long. The sink was full of dishes that had been washed but not put away, like his father had half finished the job, then never came back to it. Ethan opened a cabinet, more out of habit than curiosity. Coffee mugs, plates. A chipped bowl he remembered dropping when he was 9, bracing himself for the yelling that never came. Just a long look from his father and a muttered, "Everybody drops something." Back then, he thought that was as close to comfort as he'd ever get. He shut the cabinet and leaned on the counter, fingers pressing into the worn surface. "I don't know why I thought this would feel different," he said under his breath. He still felt outside. Outside his childhood. Outside his grief. Outside any version of closure people like to talk about in movies and therapy commercials. To him, his father had always been a hallway with closed doors. Stubborn. Sharp-tongued. Too proud to apologize. That man died. That man left behind a house full of echoes he didn't ask for. As far as Ethan was concerned, there wasn't anything left to learn about him. He straightened slowly, forcing himself back into task mode. "All right," he murmured, "let's get this over with." He moved through the hallway, passing what used to be his room. Door still scuffed from the time he kicked it when he was 16 and ready to leave for good. He paused at his father's bedroom door, but didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he headed toward the narrow set of stairs that led to the second floor. Creaking wood he knew by heart. Every step had its own sound. Its own weight. Upstairs, the light was thinner, softer. Dust floated lazily in the air, catching the morning sun. He stood in the small landing and let his eyes sweep across the hallway. His parents' room. The spare room no one ever used. The door to the attic, with that old pull string dangling from the hatch like a forgotten thought. He'd get to all of it, room by room, box by box. He glanced out the small upstairs window at the field behind the house. The land stretched out in wide lines, dry, winter brown, still. His father's world, the only thing the man had ever really talked about. Ethan remembered standing in those fields as a kid, listening to his father talk about weather, soil, crop rotation, everything but feelings. And he remembered thinking, "You'll talk for hours about dirt, but never ask me how I'm doing." He swallowed down the old sting and forced himself to move. Back downstairs, he started where he could control things, the front room. He grabbed some old cardboard boxes from the pantry, dust puffing up around them, and began picking up small things. Magazines, receipts, random junk. Something in him stayed guarded, like if he dug too deep, he'd find pieces of himself he didn't want to recognize. He told himself he knew his father, knew the temper, knew the stubbornness, knew the distance. There was nothing left here to surprise him. Just a house, just a dead man's belongings, just a job that had to be done. He stacked a few framed photos on the table, barely glancing at them. At least until one caught his eye. It was turned slightly, almost hidden behind another frame. He reached for it, fingers brushing away dust. The picture was of him, maybe 5 years old, face smeared with cake, grinning wide, eyes bright. Someone had taken it mid-laugh, his hands thrown up like he was announcing himself to the world. He stared at it. He didn't remember seeing this before. Ever. The back of the frame had something written on it, in his father's distinct, blunt handwriting. Ethan, age 5, wouldn't stop laughing. His chest tightened. He swallowed, set the photo down a little too carefully, and stepped back. A small ripple of something moved through him. Confusion, hurt, something else he didn't want to name yet. "Since when did you keep pictures of me?" he whispered to the empty room. He looked around, really looked, for the first time since walking in. Old letters on the shelf, a drawer slightly cracked open, the corner of a notebook peeking out from under a stack of bills. For the first time since he'd arrived, emotional, reading too much into everything, he grabbed another box. This was just cleaning, just closure. He believed he knew everything that mattered about the man who raised him. He was wrong. The next morning came slow. Ethan woke up on the old couch, neck stiff, jacket draped over him like some half-hearted attempt at comfort. He blinked at the ceiling for a few seconds, disoriented, before remembering where he was. The farmhouse, his father's house, his house now. Technically, though he didn't feel like he belonged in a single corner of it. He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and looked around at the dusty piles he'd made last night. Nothing was sorted. Nothing was thrown out. It was like his body had shut down before his mind could finish unpacking what that photo, that damn photo, stirred inside him. He stood, stretched, and forced himself toward the kitchen for coffee. His father's old machine sat on the counter, still plugged in, still stained from years of use. Of course it still worked. The old man never replaced anything that wasn't literally falling apart. The machine sputtered and hissed, filling the room with the familiar scent of burnt coffee. Ethan wrapped his hands around the warm mug and just stood there, letting the heat sink into his fingers. He needed to finish cleaning today. He needed to meet with the lawyer tomorrow. He needed to get out of this place before the memories swallowed him whole. He took one long sip, braced himself, and walked back into the living room. But something made him stop in the hallway. The drawer by the entry table, the one he'd noticed last night, was slightly cracked open, like it wanted to be found. Ethan frowned. He didn't remember touching it. He reached down, pulled it fully open, and froze. Inside were photographs, dozens, maybe hundreds, old, faded, some yellowed at the corners, some newer, some wrapped in plastic, all of them of him. Ethan as a baby in a blanket, face barely visible. Ethan at age 3, holding a toy truck. Ethan at 8, missing a front tooth, holding up a fishing rod with the smallest fish known to mankind. Ethan's first school photo, the one he thought his father never bought. Ethan swallowed, throat tight. "I thought you didn't care," he whispered. He remembered all the times he'd assumed his father wasn't proud of him, didn't notice him, didn't keep anything of his. But here they were, tucked away in a drawer he hadn't opened since he was a kid sneaking cookies from the kitchen. His chest tightened again. He set the photos down carefully and kept going, searching through the farmhouse with a new mixture of dread and curiosity. In his father's bedroom, Ethan found a stack of envelopes tied with an old shoelace. He sat on the bed, springs creaking, and opened the top one. It was addressed to him. Never sent. The handwriting was rough and uneven, like his father started writing, got overwhelmed, stopped, tried again later. Ethan unfolded it. "Ethan, I know we don't talk much." He blinked. His heart stumbled in his chest. He kept reading. "I don't know how to say what I want to say. I know you think I'm hard on you. Maybe I was. Maybe that's all I knew how to be." He stopped. His father, trying to reach out, trying to apologize, trying to bridge a gap Ethan had spent half his life pretending didn't matter. He turned to the next letter. "I should have told you I was proud of you when you graduated." He inhaled sharply. The next. "I saw that picture of you in the paper for your job promotion. I kept the clipping." Ethan's hand trembled. He looked around the room, at the outdated lamp, the neatly folded shirts, the smell of old tobacco in the walls. And for the first time, he felt something twist inside him. A piece of him he didn't even know was still alive. Regret. He shoved the letters back into the box, overwhelmed, and stood abruptly. He needed air. He needed distance. He needed something that wouldn't make his chest feel like it was caving in. He went back downstairs and opened the front door, and almost collided with someone. "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't know you were right there." It was Mrs. Turner, their longtime neighbor, a small woman in her late 70s, holding a casserole dish like it weighed as much as a newborn child. She smiled sadly. "I brought this for you. I know it's not easy coming back." Ethan forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner. You didn't have to." "I know," she said softly, "but your father, well, he was different this last year." Ethan stiffened. "Different how?" She hesitated, like she was deciding whether or not to say something she wasn't supposed to. Finally, she spoke. "He talked a lot about you," she said, "more than he ever did before." That alone felt impossible. "He said he had things he needed to fix before you came back home." She paused, eyes full of something heavy. "Said he wished he had more time." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "What kinds of things?" he asked. Mrs. Turner shook her head. "He didn't tell me details, just said he had regrets." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "He wasn't the same man he used to be. He was softer, quieter, worried about something." Worried about something? His father? That stubborn, stone-faced, never-back-down man? Ethan didn't know what to say. Mrs. Turner squeezed his arm. "You'll find what he left for you when you're ready," she whispered. "He said you would." A strange coldness settled in Ethan's stomach. "What did he mean by that?" he asked. She gave him a sad, almost apologetic smile. "I'm not sure," she said, but he talked like a man, carrying more than just age on his shoulders. Ethan watched her walk down the porch steps and across the yard, casserole dish held close to her chest. The wind carried the faint echo of her final words. He kept saying he had something to fix. Ethan closed the door slowly, his hand lingering on the knob. Something to fix. He repeated the phrase under his breath. Something to fix. He stood there for a long moment before turning back toward the house, toward the photos, toward the letters, toward the drawer with pages torn from notebooks, toward the attic he hadn't explored yet. Something tightened in his chest. Not fear, but a quiet warning. He thought he'd come back to clean out an old house. Instead, the house was beginning to clean him out. And something deep inside him whispered, "You don't know your father at all. Not yet." The attic had always been the one place Ethan avoided as a kid. Too dark, too dusty, too full of things his father never explained. Now standing beneath the pull cord, he hesitated again. Not because he was afraid of spiders or old boxes, but because everything he'd found so far had already cracked open parts of him he wasn't ready to look at. And something in his gut warned him, whatever's up there, it's not nothing. He reached up, grabbed the cord, and pulled. The wooden ladder unfolded with a loud creak, like the house itself was groaning awake. Dust rained down in light sheet. The smell of old cedar drifted out, mixed with something he couldn't place. Not quite mildew, not quite earth, just old time. Ethan climbed the steps slowly, each one flexing under his weight. At the top, he lifted his head into the dim attic. Light filtered through small cracks in the roof, turning the air into thick beams of gold and dust. The space was cramped, cluttered, filled with old trunks, suitcases, wooden crates, stacks of newspapers, boxes labeled in thick black marker from decades before. It was like stepping into a time capsule his father had built, but never intended to open. Ethan stood fully inside and exhaled. "All right, old man," he muttered. "What were you hiding up here?" He moved toward a stack of crates. The first held old Christmas decorations. The second had broken tools. The third was full of rusted metal things he didn't recognize. Nothing unusual, nothing important. Nothing. Then he spotted something. On the far side of the attic, half covered by a tarp, was a small wooden chest. Not large, not ornate, just intentionally placed, like someone had set it aside, like it mattered. Ethan crouched beside it and pulled the tarp away. The chest was dusty, its hinges old, but something sat on top, something that didn't belong there. An envelope, yellowed, worn, edges curled. His name wasn't on it. Instead, in his father's familiar, sharp handwriting were the words, "Do not open until he's gone." Ethan froze. A cold ripple ran through his limbs. He reached for the envelope slowly, like it might break apart if he wasn't careful. His fingers touched it, and he heard the front door slam open downstairs. Heavy footsteps. Fast. Angry. Ethan stiffened, envelope halfway lifted. Then a voice thundered up from the first floor. "Ethan, where are you?" His stomach dropped. He knew that voice. "Peter," he muttered. His uncle. His father's younger brother. And the last person he wanted to deal with right now. Ethan tucked the envelope close to his chest and moved quietly across the attic floorboards. But the footsteps were already coming up the stairs. "Ethan!" Peter barked again. "I know you're up there." Ethan reached the top of the ladder and looked down. Peter Collins stomped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, face red with something between anger and panic. Peter spotted him instantly. "What the hell do you think you're doing up there?" he demanded. Ethan kept his voice even. "Cleaning. Why?" Peter's eyes darted around the attic entrance, like he expected to see something hanging from the ceiling. "You have no right to be going through his things," he snapped. "Not without me." Ethan almost laughed. "His things? Peter, he was my father." Peter pointed a trembling finger upward. "And he owed me something. Something in that attic." Ethan's brows furrowed. "Owed you? For what?" "That's none of your business." Ethan climbed halfway down the ladder. "Actually, everything in this house is my business." Peter grabbed the ladder with one hand, shaking it so violently, Ethan almost lost his footing. "I'm not leaving," Peter spat. "Not until I get what I came for." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What you came for?" he repeated. Peter, what is going on? Peter looked up at him sharply. What did you find up there? Ethan felt the envelope press against his ribs beneath his jacket. Nothing, he lied. Peter's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe that for a second. He climbed one step toward Ethan, breath hot with frustration. You listen to me, Peter hissed. Your father promised me something valuable. I just need to know where he hid it. Ethan stared. What the hell are you talking about? Peter's face twisted into something dark. Don't play dumb. Then his eyes flicked upward, toward the attic, and something in his expression changed, hardened, sharpened. What's in the envelope? He asked coldly. Ethan froze. He hadn't shown it. He hadn't mentioned it. He hadn't even brought it fully into view, but Peter sensed it like a wolf sensing blood. Let me see it, Peter demanded, holding out his hand. No. Peter's voice rose. Give it to me. No. Damn it, Ethan. No, Ethan snapped, louder this time. You don't get to barge in here and demand things. You don't get to take what he left for me. Peter's face went red, like he was about to explode. He lied to you your whole life, Peter snarled. You think he didn't lie about this? You don't know him like I do. Ethan's voice shook but stayed firm. I knew him enough. Peter laughed, a humorless, biting sound. You didn't know a damn thing, he spat. Not about him. Not about this. He jabbed a finger upward. And if you knew the truth, you'd hate him as much as I do. The attic seemed to tilt around Ethan. Hate him? He repeated quietly. Peter's eyes flashed. He wasn't the hero you think he was, Peter said with a cruel smirk. You open that envelope, you'll see. Something cold slithered down Ethan's spine. What does that mean? He whispered. But Peter just shook his head and stepped back. You'll find out, he growled, and when you do, you'll wish you never came back. Then he turned, stomped down the stairs, and slammed the front door so hard the whole house shook. Ethan remained frozen on the ladder for a few long seconds, heart pounding, breath shallow. When the echo of the slam faded, he climbed back into the attic and sat on the dusty floor, envelope resting in his shaking hands. He stared at it. Do not open until he's gone. His father had written that, to him, for him. Whatever was inside, it was never meant for Peter, never meant for anyone but Ethan. His pulse hammering in his ears, Ethan slid a finger beneath the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single small slip of paper. Just one line. Call him. He knows everything I couldn't say. Below it, a phone number. Ethan's breath caught. Not a name, not a clue, just a number. And a promise that this, all of this, was only the beginning. The phone number on the slip of paper didn't look special. Just 10 digits. Written in his father's familiar, blunt handwriting. No name. No explanation. No hint of what everything I couldn't say even meant. Ethan stared at it like it might rearrange itself and give him answers. It didn't. He sat on the attic floor for a long time, legs crossed, envelope torn open beside him, dust floating in the light like tiny, indifferent galaxies. His uncle's words kept replaying. If you knew the truth, you'd hate him as much as I do. He shut his eyes, grinding his teeth. He'd spent years trying not to hate his father, trying to be indifferent instead. Anger was heavy. Indifference was easier. But now there was something under the surface. Something sharp. Something waiting. He took out his phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad. What the hell did you do, old man? He whispered. Then he inhaled slowly and punched in the number. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. He almost hung up. On the 4th ring, someone answered. Yeah. The voice was rough, older, the kind of voice that had smoked too many cigarettes and seen too much. "Hi," Ethan said awkwardly. "My name is Ethan Cole. The voice cut him off. "Ethan," the man repeated. "John's boy?" Hearing his father's first name in someone else's mouth felt strange, almost intrusive. "Yes," Ethan said slowly. "You knew my father?" A pause, the kind that carried weight. "I did," the man replied. "I've been waiting for this call." Ethan blinked. "Waiting? Your dad said you'd find that number when he couldn't explain the rest himself," the man said. "Guess that day's come." Ethan's throat tightened. "Who are you?" he asked. The man's voice softened just a fraction. "Name's Frank Deacon," he said. "Used to be a detective. Now I'm just an old man who knows too much about this town." Detective. The word landed in Ethan's chest like a stone. "Why would my father be talking to a detective?" he asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Not over the phone," Frank said. "If you're at the house, I can be there in 40 minutes. You still at the old farmhouse off Ridge Lane?" Ethan hesitated. "How do you know where I am?" "Son," Frank replied quietly, "your father called me months ago and told me this exact day might come. He told me where you'd end up standing when it did." Ethan swallowed. 40 minutes. He looked around the attic, dusty boxes, old crates, the chest that had been hiding the envelope like a secret. "Fine," he said. "I'm here." He hung up before he could talk himself out of it. 40 minutes felt like 4 hours. Ethan spent most of it pacing the living room, glancing every few seconds at the driveway through the front window. His nerves felt frayed, like wires stripped of their insulation. His mother used to tell him that truth was like medicine, bitter on the tongue, good for you in the end. His father had never talked about truth. He talked about work, responsibility, doing what needs doing. Now Ethan wondered how much those things overlapped. The sound of a vehicle crunching up the driveway snapped him out of his thoughts. A dark sedan pulled up. Not new, not fancy, just functional. The engine cut, the door opened, and a man stepped out. Frank Deacon looked exactly like his voice sounded. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray hair cut short, deep lines carved into his face, a heavy coat hanging open over a collared shirt. He moved like someone whose back reminded him of the years, but whose eyes missed nothing. Ethan opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Deacon?" "Frank," the man said. "You're Ethan." It wasn't a question. He studied Ethan for a moment. Something like recognition in his gaze. "You look like him," he said. "Around the eyes, but you carry yourself like someone else." "I'll take that as a compliment," Ethan muttered. Frank stepped inside, wiping his boots on the mat out of habit. The familiar smell of old wood and coffee wrapped around them. For a second, Frank just stood there, looking around the house like it held ghosts only he could see. "Haven't been here in a while," he said quietly. "You've been here before?" Ethan asked, surprised. "A few times," Frank replied. "Your father wasn't much of a talker, but when he started looking into things, he needed somewhere quiet." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Looking into what?" he pushed. Frank didn't answer directly. Instead, he nodded toward the kitchen. "Let's sit." At the table, with 2 mugs of stale coffee between them, Frank rested his hands on the wood and looked Ethan in the eye. "Your father reached out to me last year," he said. "Said he needed help digging into old business. Things that happened before you were born." "Old business," Ethan repeated. Frank's eyes dropped briefly to the envelope still on the table. "He didn't tell you anything?" he asked. "No," Ethan said bitterly. My father didn't tell me much about anything. Frank nodded, like he'd expected that answer. Doesn't surprise me, he said. He was a stubborn man. Stubborn and guilty. Bad combination. Guilty. The word clawed at Ethan's ribs. Guilty of what? He demanded. Frank shook his head. Slow down, he said calmly. I promised your father I'd show you where it starts, before I told you where it ends. Ethan glared. Peter said if I knew the truth, I'd hate him, he snapped. You expect me to just sit here and sip coffee while you talk around it? At the mention of Peter's name, something flickered across Frank's face. Dislike. Distrust. Deep and old. He's already sniffing around, huh? Frank muttered. Should have figured. He leaned forward. Listen to me, he said, voice firm. Your father wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the villain Peter wants you to believe either. Then what was he? Ethan shot back. A man who found out the ground he was standing on was built on someone else's bones, Frank said quietly. The room seemed to tilt. Excuse me? Ethan whispered. Frank's gaze was steady. Your father came to me with old documents, he said. Land deeds, newspaper clippings, letters, things this town buried a long time ago. Things tying this land, he gestured vaguely toward the window, to people who aren't here anymore. Ethan frowned. You mean previous owners? Frank's jaw tightened. I mean families pushed off their land, he said. Black families, poor families, folks who didn't have the lawyers, the power, or the skin color to fight back when things turned ugly. The words felt like a punch. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. And my family? Benefited, Frank said. Some of them might have done more than that. Silence dropped like a weight. Ethan's mind raced. His father's letters. The photos. Mrs. Turner saying he had something to fix. The envelope in the attic. Call him. He knows everything I couldn't say. It all sharpened into a single, terrible question. What did he find? Ethan asked, voice low. Frank didn't answer right away. Instead, he pushed back from the table and stood. I can't explain it with words, he said. Not properly. You need to see it. He turned toward the hallway. Where are you going? Ethan asked, confused. Frank nodded toward the far end of the hall. Basement door still in the same place? He asked. A chill ran through Ethan. Yeah, he said slowly. But there's nothing down there except old tools and canned tomatoes. Frank gave him a look. Then you've never looked closely enough, he replied. He walked down the hallway with the certainty of someone who'd walked it before. Ethan followed, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. At the end of the hall, Frank stopped in front of the basement door. He rested his hand on the knob. Your father told me, he said quietly. If he didn't get to finish what he started, you would. He said you were the only one who could. I don't even know what it is yet, Ethan muttered. Frank opened the door. A rush of cool, stale air drifted upward. You will, he said. He flicked on the basement light. Weak yellow bulbs lit the stairs going down. Shadows danced along the concrete walls. Frank glanced back at him. Ready, son? No. Ethan wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to reevaluate the man he'd spent years resenting. He wasn't ready to find out what sins were hidden under the floorboards of his childhood. He wasn't ready for any of it. But he nodded anyway. Yeah, he said softly. Let's go. Together they descended into the basement. With every step, the past grew closer. And somewhere below, behind dusty shelves and old tools, the truth his father could never say out loud was waiting in the dark. Waiting for Ethan to turn on the light. The basement smelled like cold concrete, rust, and memories that had been left too long in the dark. Ethan, held the railing as he descended, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. Frank moved slower, more careful, but with the silent confidence of someone who had walked this path before. The weak basement light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across old jars, battered toolboxes, and cardboard boxes that sagged under decades of dampness. Ethan's voice echoed slightly when he spoke. "What are we looking for?" Frank didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the back corner, the one tucked behind the heavy metal shelves. He grabbed the edge of a shelf and nudged it. The shelf scraped against the floor with a deep groan. Dust fell like ash. Ethan frowned. "What are you?" "Help me push it," Frank grunted. Ethan rushed to the other side. Together, they shoved the shelf aside, metal grinding painfully against concrete, until it shifted enough to reveal something behind it. A wall. No, not just a wall. A door. Small, rough, wooden, hidden, boarded up with old planks nailed across it in uneven lines. Ethan stared. "What the hell?" Frank exhaled slowly, his breath shaky. "This," he said, "is where it begins." Ethan reached out and touched one of the boards. It was brittle, old, splintering under his fingers. Someone had nailed it shut in a hurry, or in desperation. "Your father didn't build this," Frank said. "This door was here before he moved in, but he didn't know that until last year. And once he found it, he couldn't stop digging." A chill crawled down Ethan's spine. "What's behind it?" he whispered. Frank's expression was heavy, tired, haunted. "Your father called it the room where the town buried its lies." Ethan's breath faltered. Frank handed him a crowbar. "You open it," he said. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Then he wedged the crowbar beneath the first board and pried. The old nails squealed before snapping free. One board dropped to the floor, then another. When the last board fell, Ethan pushed the small wooden door open. It groaned, like something in the house didn't want to wake up. Dust poured out, thick and stale. The flashlight beam from Frank's hand cut through the darkness beyond. A narrow room appeared, no bigger than a walk-in closet. But what was inside? Ethan felt his breath freeze. The room was lined with shelves. Not shelves for tools or jars. Shelves filled with files, stacks of yellowed papers, cracked leather notebooks, maps pinned to the wall, old sepia photographs, folders tied with string, and in the center, a small wooden desk with a leather journal lying open. Ethan stepped inside, heart pounding. His fingers grazed an old newspaper clipping pinned to the wall. It read, "Local families relocated. Land purchased for development. Year, 1971. He frowned and scanned the article. But someone had scribbled in angry pencil marks across the edges. Lies. Not purchased. Stolen. They didn't relocate. They were pushed. Ethan's stomach twisted. He turned to another clipping. Missing family. Case closed. No foul play found. Year, 1969. Below it, someone, his father judging by the handwriting, had written, "Why did the sheriff never investigate?" Ethan swallowed hard. "What is all this?" he murmured. Frank stepped beside him, shining the flashlight across the walls. "This," he said quietly, "is the evidence your father collected. Documents tied to black families who lived on the surrounding land long before the town expanded." Ethan turned sharply. "What do you mean, tied to families?" Frank gave him a steady, sad look. "Families who lost everything," he said. "Families who mysteriously sold their land, except there's no legitimate record of any sale. Families who vanished, whose homes were burned down, whose names never made it into the nice, clean history books this town likes to hold up." Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. My father was looking into this, he said. Why? Frank nodded toward the journal on the desk. He left the answer in there. Ethan approached it slowly, the beam of the flashlight following him. The journal was old, leather cracked from years of handling. He opened it to the page marked with a faded ribbon. The date at the top was smudged, but the handwriting was unmistakably his father's. Hard, sharp strokes, letters pressed too deeply into the page, as if emotion had pushed the pen. Ethan read the first line aloud. I thought our family built this land. Now I learn we built it on someone else's ashes. His breath hitched. He kept reading. I was raised to believe this farm passed down clean. But the records aren't clean. The stories aren't clean. And the guilt isn't clean. Ethan's eyes scanned further down the page. The Cole family didn't inherit this land. We took it, and we weren't the only ones. His jaw tightened. I don't understand, Ethan whispered. Frank stepped closer. Your family wasn't the only one involved, he said. Whole parts of this county were built on land taken illegally from black farmers. It was easier back then. No one questioned it. No one recorded it properly. No one cared. Ethan felt nausea rise. And my father found proof? He asked. Frank nodded. He spent the last years of his life digging through courthouse archives, interviewing elders, tracking down scraps of evidence no one wanted found. He was trying to do the right thing, even though it meant going against his own blood. Ethan shut the journal and pressed it against his chest, as if the weight of it might hold him together. Why didn't he tell me? He whispered. Frank lowered his head. Because he didn't know how, he said. He thought you hated him. Thought you'd think he was dragging you into old ghosts. Thought you'd leave again. Ethan's throat tightened painfully. Frank continued. Your father was scared. Not for himself, for you. He said this truth could tear the town apart. He said Peter. He stopped. Peter, what? Ethan demanded. Frank hesitated, then said, he said Peter would try to stop anyone digging into the past. Ethan froze. My uncle was involved? Frank's silence was answer enough. Ethan felt the walls close in. His father's notes, the missing families, the stolen land, Peter's desperation. The boarded-up door. Everything was shifting, twisting into a picture he didn't want to see. He turned slowly toward a photograph on the wall. A black family of 5, standing in front of a small farmhouse, smiling proudly. Ethan touched the edge of the photo with trembling fingers. What happened to them? He whispered. Frank exhaled heavily. No one ever saw them again after 1970, he said. And their land became part of this property. Ethan's hand shook. He looked around the hidden room, at the maps, the files, the evidence his father had gathered alone. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? He whispered. Frank rested a hand on his shoulder. Finish what your father started. Ethan closed his eyes. He hadn't cried at the funeral, not once. But here, in the dusty dark of a hidden room full of truths he was never meant to find, his chest cracked open. His breath hitched. His eyes burned. Everything hurt. This wasn't a burden. This wasn't a mystery. This wasn't even a legacy. It was a responsibility. One his father had died trying to carry. Now the weight of it sat in Ethan's palms, and it was heavier than the whole damn farmhouse. The hidden room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls had closed in around Ethan, trapping him between the man he thought his father was, and the man whose truth was buried under decades of silence. The journal weighed heavily in his hands, too light to carry so much guilt, too fragile to hold so much history. He swallowed hard, eyes stinging, throat tight. Frank stood quietly nearby, giving him space he didn't ask for, but definitely needed. Ethan wiped his face with the back of his hand, frustrated at the tears he hadn't planned on shedding. He wasn't crying for his father. Not exactly. He was crying for everything he didn't know, everything everything he'd never asked. He opened the journal again. The next entry was dated about 10 months ago. The truth isn't just old. It's alive. It breathes in this land, in the silence of the people who survived, in the ghosts of the ones who didn't. Ethan kept reading, breath trembling. When I found the first deed, I thought it was an error, a missing signature, a misfiled document. When I found the second, I thought maybe it was just coincidence. By the fifth, I knew the truth. Underneath were photocopies of typed documents, land transfers, property lines, names of families whose signatures were forged in thick black ink. I can't, Ethan whispered, stopping mid-sentence as his jaw tightened. He flipped another page. This one was different. Not neat handwriting like the rest, but jagged letters like his father had been shaking while he wrote it. I tried to tell Peter. Ethan paused. Frank shifted his weight behind him. Ethan kept reading. I thought he'd help me make things right. I was wrong. He told me to burn everything, said I was destroying our family name. Ethan's hands clenched around the edges of the page. A sick, cold feeling spread through him. He threatened me. Told me if I didn't stop digging, I'd regret it. Said I should let the dead stay dead. But how can I? How can anyone? Ethan shut the journal, chest heaving. That bastard, he muttered. He came to the house. He tried to take the envelope. He knew. Frank nodded once. I'm not surprised. Ethan's voice grew sharp. You knew too, didn't you? He demanded. You knew my uncle was involved. Frank met his eyes. I suspected, he said calmly. Your father, he didn't say Peter was directly responsible, but he implied he wasn't innocent either. Ethan shook his head, pacing the tiny room. So he knew, he muttered. He knew about the land theft. He knew about the families. He knew what our family did, and he still wanted to keep it hidden. Yes, Frank said quietly. And my father, Ethan said, voice cracking. He spent his last years trying to fix it alone. Frank sighed deeply, stepping closer. He didn't want you involved. Why? Ethan snapped. Why not tell me? Why not ask me for help? Why not? His voice broke. He turned away, pressing both hands against the shelf to steady himself. Frank spoke softly. Because he thought you hated him. That stopped Ethan cold. Frank continued. He told me you two barely talked. He said you left angry. He said he deserved it. Ethan's eyes softened, but didn't lose their pain. We argued, he whispered. All the time. About stupid things. He was stubborn, I was stubborn. I thought he didn't care. Frank shook his head. He cared, son, more than he knew how to say. Ethan gripped the shelf harder, knuckles white. I didn't even cry at the funeral, he admitted, voice hollow. I thought I'd made peace with losing him years ago. The journal sat open behind him, pages whispering in the draft like they wanted to be read. He turned back, flipping deeper. Another entry caught his eye. I don't know how to tell him. I don't know how to look my son in the eye and admit the land he grew up on wasn't ours to begin with. He's already angry at me. If he knew this, he might never come home again. Ethan pressed a hand to his mouth, breath shaking violently. His father hadn't told him the truth because he was afraid of losing him. The realization hit Ethan like a blow. Years of distance, years of resentment, years of silence between them. All because neither man knew how to speak the right words at the right time. Ethan sat down on the stool beside the desk, elbows on his knees, journal open like a wound. Frank stepped closer. "There's more," he said. "Your father wasn't just researching. He was preparing something." Ethan looked up. "Preparing what?" Frank nodded toward another stack of papers on the desk, neatly arranged, labeled in his father's hand. Claims, deeds, names, addresses. Restitution, Frank said. He wanted to give the land back, or pay for what couldn't be returned. Ethan stared at the papers, mind spinning. He wanted to fix it, Ethan whispered. Frank nodded. He was planning to meet with the descendants of the families, Frank said. Set things right. Tell the truth publicly. Ethan swallowed. Then why didn't he? He whispered. Frank's voice grew quiet. He ran out of time. Silence filled the room again. Heavy, thick, grief-soaked. Ethan lifted the journal again, turning to the last entry. The handwriting was weaker, shakier. If you find this, son, I'm sorry. I failed to finish what I started. But you can. You have the courage I didn't. Ethan shut the journal with trembling hands. He took a long breath, steadying himself. Then he stood, slowly, but with purpose. He turned to Frank. What do I have to do? He asked. Frank studied him for a moment, nodding with quiet approval. You already know the answer, he said. Ethan exhaled, the decision settling into his bones. I have to finish it. Yes, Frank said softly. You do. Ethan looked back into the hidden room, at the maps, the documents, the stolen history preserved by a man who didn't know how to say I'm sorry. The different way to say he loved his son, even if Ethan hadn't known. The morning after Ethan read the last words in his father's journal, he woke up with something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not comfort, not closure, not forgiveness. Just purpose. Raw, heavy, undiluted. He stood in the kitchen, coffee untouched, staring at the stack of documents laid out across the table. Maps of land stolen, names of families erased, signatures forged, and the journal, the heart of everything, open to the page where his father said, You can finish what I couldn't. Ethan lifted the first file. The Carter family. A deed showing land seized under emergency relocation. A lie. A letter from a mother begging the town to reconsider. A newspaper clipping about a fire that mysteriously ended the case. He picked up the next. The Hodges family. The same woman who brought him food. The same woman who'd said his father had something to fix. Her family had been one of the displaced ones. Ethan closed the folder gently. He wasn't just holding proof. He was holding people's lives. And he knew what he had to do. Frank sat across from him, arms crossed, watching Ethan sift through the papers. You ready? Frank asked. No, Ethan said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. Frank nodded with a barely there smile. Good answer. They made a list. 27 names. 27 pieces of a story the town had buried. Ethan picked the first. Margaret Carter, granddaughter of one of the original families. He dialed. The phone rang twice. Hello? A cautious voice answered. Hi, my name is Ethan Cole, he said. My father lived on Ridge Lane. I think we need to talk. Silence. Then a slow, controlled reply. About what? Ethan swallowed. About something my father discovered, he said. About land that belonged to your family, and how it was taken. A long pause. Then, I'll be there in an hour. By noon, the farmhouse had people in it for the first time in decades. People who carried the weight of loss on their faces. Some cried. Some stared at the documents in numb disbelief. Some stood rigid with anger they'd carried for generations. Ethan explained everything. What his father found. What the hidden room held. What the documents proved. What his uncle tried to hide. What Ethan believed should be done. Some broke down in tears. Some hugged him. Some couldn't look at him. Some whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for doing what nobody else ever did." And Ethan took all of it, the pain, the gratitude, the grief, as his responsibility. Word about Ethan's meeting spread fast. Too fast. By the time he finished talking to the seventh family, a truck skidded into the driveway with a screech of gravel. Peter. Ethan stiffened as his uncle climbed out, face flushed with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Peter barked. Families turned, expressions wary, some stepping protectively in front of Ethan. Ethan stepped forward. "Telling the truth," he said calmly. "Telling—" Peter's voice broke into a bitter laugh. "You idiot. You're ruining everything. Everything our family built. Everything your father protected." Ethan cut him off. "No," he said firmly. "Everything our family covered up." Peter's face twisted. "You think you're a hero?" Peter spit. "You're a fool. You believe those people? You believe those stories?" "They're not stories," Ethan said. "They're documents, letters, deeds, and my father's own words." Peter's eyes flicked to the families nearby. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. Ethan stepped closer until they were eye to eye. "I'm doing what he couldn't finish," he said. "The right thing." Peter scoffed. "The right thing? You're going to give away land, money, our name?" "It wasn't ours," Ethan shot back. "It was stolen." Peter's mouth opened, then shut. His jaw clenched. His fists curled at his sides. Ethan's voice softened. "You knew," he said quietly, "didn't you?" Peter's eyes darted away, and that was answer enough. "You knew," Ethan repeated, louder this time, the room hearing every word. "And you did nothing? Worse, you wanted to keep it buried," Peter snapped. "This will destroy us." Ethan shook his head. "No," he said, "this will finally set us free." Peter's nostrils flared. "You'll regret this." Ethan didn't blink, didn't step back. "No," he said, "I'll regret if I don't." Peter stared at him for a long moment, then stormed off, boots pounding the porch steps, truck tearing down the road in a spray of gravel. He was gone. The family stayed, and Ethan stood taller than he ever had in his life. With Frank's guidance, Ethan began the process, filing corrected documents, launching land return claims, setting up a fund from the estate, organizing a public meeting. The farmhouse became a hub, phones ringing, papers spread across tables, neighbors stepping in cautiously to listen or offer support. News spread. Some residents supported Ethan. Ethan looked out at the land. The same fields he'd once avoided, once resented. Now, they felt different, lighter, honest, free. Evening sunlight poured across the fields in slow, golden waves. Ethan stood in front of the farmhouse, the same porch where he once felt like an outsider in his own childhood. Now, as the sky shifted from orange to a bruised purple, the place felt different. Not fixed, not healed, not perfect, just honest. he stepped down onto the grass, breathing in the scent of warm soil and fresh earth. The field stretched out behind the house, rolling. He stopped at the barn door and pushed it open. The hinges creaked as always, but the inside wasn't dark anymore. He'd cleaned it, opened the windows, let the light in. The same barn where he once felt like a kid sent to fetch tools and stay out of the way was now a space filled with chairs, papers, files, and evidence of work being done. Real work, meaningful work, the kind his father once tried to do alone. Ethan walked to the center of the barn and rested the journal on the folding table. He opened it to the last page, the one he could barely read the first time, because his vision kept blurring. I wasn't brave enough. I hope you will be. He ran his thumb over the words slowly, almost gently. He thought about the man who wrote them, a stubborn, distant father who didn't know how to hug his son. In the only way he knew how, Ethan shut the journal and whispered, I get it now. His voice echoed against the barn rafters. He stepped outside, and the fading sun hit his face in a warm burst. The farm was quiet. No trucks, no shouting, no angry footsteps from Peter, no whispers of old secrets. Just a soft breeze pushing through the fields. He looked at the land, really looked at it. Not as property, not as inheritance, not as something passed down through blood and tradition, but as a story with chapters missing, rewritten, crossed out, a story scarred by greed and injustice, and one his father had spent his last breath trying to correct. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, not pain, not regret, something gentler, something like peace. He spoke softly into the wind. I came here to clean out a house. He paused, a long, slow exhale. Instead, I uncovered. He walked toward the fence line, where the tall grass brushed against his jeans. He rested his hand on a worn wooden post and let the breeze carry the next words out of him. My father wasn't perfect, he said. Not even close. A faint smile tugged at his lips, the kind that hurt a little. But he spent the last years of his life trying to undo the mistakes of generations. He looked down, toes brushing the dirt. And now, so will I. Ethan turned back toward the farmhouse. Inside, people had begun to gather again. Families coming to sign forms, others dropping off documents, some just wanting to talk. The once empty home had become a place of movement, of restoration, of long overdue conversations. The town wasn't fixed. The land wasn't fully restored. Justice wasn't complete. But something had shifted. A wound had been uncovered, and healing, the real kind, had finally begun. Ethan reached the porch steps and paused, looking back again at the land stretching behind him. Sometimes, he whispered, the past hides in dust and silence. He felt the words settle deep inside him, a truth he couldn't unlearn, waiting for the right hands to lift it into the light. He walked inside the farmhouse, the home built on secrets, now rebuilt on truth, carrying not just his father's journal, but his father's unfinished courage. And for the first time in his life, Ethan